Right, so today's topic is homogenization. And what I'm going to do with this word is create a bit of a process that we should be doing with all of the key language of this course. So the first step is to always understand what does the word mean. And then after we have that mastered, we need to move on and say, how is this something connected to globalization? And should we celebrate it? Is it something good about globalization? And then, how is it something that is connected to globalization that we need to be cautious about? Is this maybe something that we should be concerned about? So that's a big part of the activity. How does it connect to globalization? Does it connect in a good way? Does it connect in a bad way? Once we explore that, then we can jump into the, how should we respond to this? How should governments respond to this? How should citizens respond to this? Should we promote globalization because it's making our lives better due to this phenomenon? Or should we be insulating and protecting ourselves from it? There's 3 writing assignments in Dash 2. The second writing assignment looks like this. So the second writing assignment is worth 40% of the 3 writing assignments combined. It's 20, 40, 40. And in the second writing assignment, we're going to be showing you cartoons, we're going to be showing you graphs, we're going to be showing you photographs, and at the heart of each one of them is a word, like homogenization. And what we want you to be able to do is unpack that resource and see what is being communicated about homogenization, or whichever word it is. And then the second part of the assignment, then we want you to take a position and say, given, homogenization, how should we respond to globalization? So this is, for many students, the most difficult writing assignment in the stream. I'm not going to do that assignment yet, but this assignment that we're doing today is a step towards it. It's a step towards it that's helping us organize our ideas. So when we learn new words in this class, and we've only really learned a couple so far, we need to pause and see how that word could connect to that assignment. So we've learned homogenization. So the first thing that we need to understand in our notes is, what is homogenization? It means global sameness. Global sameness. Homogenization could be cultural. It could be linguistic. Linguistic meaning we're speaking the same language. Cultural, we wear the same clothing. Could be social. We interact with people the same as others would around the world. Could be political. We could have the same political system. We could have the same political values. Could be economic homogenization. There's many dimensions, just like there's many dimensions of globalization. But the first step, before I can give you a cartoon that shows homogenization, really?
Sorry for coming in late. It is Thursday, February the 3rd. It is day 3 today. Grade 12 students, your photos are today and tomorrow. That is down in the drama room. Please note the change of location. Grade 10, 11, and 12 timetable changes are over for this semester. Our book room will be open during seminar and lunch today and tomorrow. It will be closed all the rest of the day. If you have not returned your semester textbooks, semester 1 textbooks, please do so ASAP, as there are students who do not have a textbook for their class. Johnston's will be here this afternoon outside the music room. Stop by their table and check out their grad and school jewelry. And semester 1 and quarter 2 construction students, you need to pick up your construction projects by end of the week, that is the end of the day tomorrow, or they will be disposed of. That is all for now. Have a great morning.
All right, so enough of that. Homogenization, global sameness. Could be economic, could be political, could be social. So what do we do with that? Well, we're going to be given sources that we quote-unquote unpack. Unpack just means you look at a source for some kind of details. And we try to figure out, does this source like it or dislike it? Does it think homogenization is good or bad? Well, we're going to find lots of sources that say it's bad. So let's talk about that part of the concept. Homogenization is bad because homogenization could be shown to be bad because global sameness means we lose our uniqueness. So some people might be upset about globalization. They might be saying, you know what, we need to be concerned. Because globalization has an impact on your identity. What is that impact? Homogenization. It means you're going to lose your uniqueness. And there's related words, like assimilation. Taken to an extreme, assimilation, what does it mean? It means cultural genocide. So we start with a word like homogenization, and we need to understand that it could be presented to us in a negative way. I can give you a source that looks at assimilation and cultural genocide, and therefore it's a cautionary tale. We need to be careful when we globalize, when we interconnect, because when we interconnect, we may lose ourselves. We may lose our identity. We're Canadians. We're familiar with this story. Unfortunately, it's a local story. Unfortunately, due to the Indian Act, due to the relationship between the Canadian federal government and Canada's First Nations and Indigenous Aboriginal peoples, we've had attempted assimilation. We've had attempted cultural genocide through residential schools. So we could give you a source where the context of the source, context just means what's the story about? The source is about residential schools. That's the context. But what is the theme of the source? The theme is homogenization. It's simulation. So it's a cautionary tale about globalization. We need to be careful. When we globalize, we can lose ourselves. We can lose our uniqueness. We could also have another source about homogenization, and it may look at conformity. When we all become the same, when we conform to the group, we could lose our freedom. Looking more so to social 20, we're going to have some case studies like Hitler's Germany, Stalin's USSR, and in Hitler's Germany, there's conformity. You had to conform to the vision that the Fuhrer was giving for the state. And those who could not conform, they were hidden from society. They were put into concentration camps. And ultimately, many of them were killed. Conformity is a loss of freedom. And in that loss of freedom, some will be marginalized. Some will have their value taken away, marginalization. That's a concerning part of homogenization. We had a rally this weekend. At heart, what was the rally? It was people who don't want to conform. They don't want to wear masks. They don't want to follow mandates. They don't want to see their freedom taken away. They feel like their voice has been marginalized, that no one's listening. So we have a negative side of homogenization. Global sameness means loss of uniqueness, assimilation, genocide. It means conformity, which could be a loss of freedom, could be marginalization. It's also boring. Uniformity. Homogenization is also uniformity. Why do we travel? We travel to see different architecture. We travel to experience different culture, different food, different languages, different aromas. And if we have had a global village where everything was the same, it's kind of like driving into those neighborhoods where there's like just one or two different types of houses. And you might end up, comically maybe, but you might end up pulling up into the wrong driveway because everyone's house kind of looks like yours. So the consequence of homogenization might be uniformity. And that might be very uninspiring, might be very boring. So there's a negative side to homogenization. Now, if there's a negative side, if it leads to assimilation, if it leads to genocide, if it leads to loss of freedom, marginalization, uniformity, then what should government do? How could the Canadian government protect us Globalization, interconnectedness. How can they protect us from a negative consequence of it? If when we connect with the Americans, if when we connect with our allies, our trading partners, we feel forces of homogenization, they want us to become like them, what can the government do? Well, the government in Canada did try something. Culturally, they created something called the CRTC. Really hope that's not a permanent marker. The CRTC. And what the CRTC does is it regulates how much Canadian content is on radio and television. This was back when radio and television would be the primary ways that people would consume culture. They were fearful that because radio and television wasn't being regulated, it was basically just a loudspeaker for American culture. We were listening to American music, watching American programs, and we were becoming Americanized. So what should be the role of government in light of homogenization? The Canadian federal government said we need to protect Canadian consumers because they're eating a poison. They're eating Americana, and it's going to change them. Now, next year in 20, I might argue that Canadians and Americans are all basically the same, but most of you will argue with me and say that that's wrong. Canadians are different. You know, we're this, this, and this, whereas Americans are this, this, and this. We have different values. We have empathy and compassion. We have universal health care. And you might be right. So, wanting to stay different from America, not wanting to be the same, our federal government said, let's pass the CRTC. That's one example of what government can do in response to homogenization. But there's other things. I want you to think critically. It's part of the assignment. I want you to think critically. What are some things Canadian government can do to protect our unique culture? Maybe they could fund multiculturalism so that people have the resources needed to gather at places like Borlaug Park and celebrate Heritage Days. Maybe we need to have official holidays like Heritage Days so people can pause and revitalize with their culture. Maybe we need to look at education and what's in the curriculum. You know, many people 20 years ago may not know, are we on Treaty 6 territory, Treaty 7, Treaty 8? What is a treaty? So we have to look at what is being taught so that we can avoid global sameness and we can celebrate our uniqueness and celebrate our history. So there's lots of roles government could play, and that's something I want you to think critically about. But there's also things that we could do. Citizens, individuals, consumers. So as a consumer, is there something I can do to avoid homogenization? As a consumer, maybe I buy Canadian products first. When given the choice, maybe I even pay a little bit more for the Canadian product. As a consumer, maybe there's a response to homogenization. Knowing that it's there, how can I protect myself from it? We're not just consumers, we're citizens. We can be activists. We can protest as people did on the weekend and as people continue to do today. So how can we be an activist? How can we pressure or lobby government to do something? How can we pressure others to respond to it? But there's a flip side. Homogenization is also a good phenomenon. It's a force of good. It creates familiarity, which leads to comfort. When we travel, we like to feel comfortable. It's good to be able to see a sign and recognize that's the bathroom. It's good to be able to see a sign and recognize that's where I find a taxi, or that's where I can find medicine. We need some universal symbols for safety. As we've already stated this week, all pilots in the world speak English, and so do people at ground control, because we need no language barrier there. If there's a language barrier, that could lead to an airplane crash. So it's efficient, it's predictable to have a global language. Global networks may provide an opportunity for us to transcend this reality. Elon Musk is he's not a trillionaire yet, but he's gathering hundreds of billions of dollars so that he can help propel us to Mars. He can't do that without globalization. He can't do that without economic homogenization. That his company, Tesla, couldn't be as large as it is if it didn't have a global market to sell to. Homogenization creates opportunity for us to maybe get to the next stage of reality. That if we just insulate ourselves and be with Tasmanites or Albertans or Canadians and hide from the rest of the global village, our progress will be stunted technologically as a species. We also have some universal concerns. Homogenization could be the homogenization of human rights. Homogenization means the elimination of things like ritual suicide. It used to be the practice that if your husband died before you in some cultures, you were expected to throw yourself onto their burning body at the funeral. Committing a ritual suicide. There's still societies that have mutilations. We used to have societies that practice cannibalism. Some things need to be universal. We also need to work together to combat shared challenges for the 21st century moving forward. And it's not just climate, it's injustice, it's poverty. And where we have these global challenges, if we don't have homogenization, how can we be able to solve it? If China is not on board, and 1.4 billion Chinese are still rowing the wrong way, working against climate change, working against poverty or injustice, then the amount of success we will have is limited. It's like being on a hockey team. You know, you can have 20 players that are all focused, but if you have one player that is trying to do their own thing, especially if that's the goalie, you're going to have troubles. You're not a goalie, right? Thank goodness, goalies, that's a totally different breed of people. So, talking about, we need global sameness, we need unity, we need conformity. Some of those words that we use as negative words, conformity, unity, uniformity, those can also be positive words. So the next step would be, if homogenization can lead to good things, how can we promote it? How do we promote English to be a universal language? Or how do we promote universal symbols? How can we promote the end of ritual suicides and mutilations and child marriages and enslavement and all of these other concerns that we want to move beyond socially? How do we promote discussions about poverty and injustice? And how do we do that at a government level? And how do we do that at an individual level? So we take a word that we've studied that is pretty simple. Homogenization, global sameness. And then we look into the word and say, these are some thoughts about it. That's our research. This is what other people are saying about it. And then the next step, maybe the hardest step, is then we ask you, now that we know what it is and what it means, how should we respond to it? And students usually, when there's like a paragraph to do this and a paragraph to do that, students will typically perform higher at this paragraph. That's the hard part of the course. The hard part of the course is, now that we know this, how should governments and citizens respond? As we learn these words, we need to pick stuff up. So today we picked up the idea of, we respond to homogenization with governments pass the CRTC, or governments can create curriculum to promote local culture. Governments can create national holidays like Heritage Days. They can fund multiculturalism and tolerance. These are just some quick examples of government responses to fight against the forces of homogenization. So I'm going to give you a moment to grab some Chromebooks, and we're going to look a little further at homogenization. It's also a nice break from listening to me.